The commander said, "No mercy during sparring. The Death World girl took the order." Literally. Part 1. The New Recruit. From the Death Rock. The ship was called the Sovereign Reach. It was long and gray and moved through deep space like a slow, patient animal. It had been in service for 11 years, and in those 11 years it had carried soldiers from 7 different species: the Solvari, the Murak, the Drenathi, and 4 others. All of them had learned to live together in the narrow steel halls of the ship. It was not always easy, but they made it work. Commander Valethor stood at the head of the briefing room and looked at the list on his datapad. He had gray-blue skin, 4 arms, and eyes that were a little too wide for a human face to look comfortable meeting. He had commanded this unit for 3 years. He had seen a lot of things. He liked to think nothing surprised him anymore. And he was about to be wrong about that. The new transfer orders were straightforward. 3 soldiers were being added to his unit from the United Earth Marine Corps. 2 of them he had already read about. Corporal Derek Holt, age 26, 2 years of coalition joint operations, solid record, no major disciplinary notes. Sergeant Aaron Briggs, age 30, 3 years of coalition service, experienced in shipboard combat, described by his previous commander as reliable and stubborn in equal measure. The third name on the list was shorter. Private Lily Kane, age 22. 1 year of active service with the 3rd Division of the United Earth Marine Corps. Previously deployed in the Terran-Kepler conflict zone. No disciplinary record. 1 commendation for actions during a ground ambush that the file described only briefly, using very careful, very neutral language. At the bottom of her file was a small box that all human soldiers had in their coalition records. It said, Origin World, Earth. Classification, Class 7 Environmental Hazard. Valethor had seen that box before. He always looked at it the same way a person looks at a sign on a door that says Warning, with interest, but not with full understanding of what was behind it. He set the datapad down and waited. The 3 humans arrived together, and they walked into the briefing room and stood in a loose line, and the other soldiers in the room, Dren the Murak, 2 Solvari named Keth and Orvan, and the Drenathi scholar warrior Serath, all looked at them in the way that different species always looked at humans for the first time. Quietly, carefully, like something they had read about but never fully believed. Derek was broad-shouldered and relaxed. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and looked like it did that a lot. Byron was taller, quieter, with dark eyes that moved around the room and took stock of everything in it without being obvious about it. He nodded at Valethor once, like a man who had introduced himself to enough commanding officers that he no longer needed to perform the moment. And then there was Lily. She was not large. That was the first thing. She was not tall or wide or built in any way that announced itself. See, she had brown hair pulled back from her face and brown eyes that were steady and calm. She wore her uniform cleanly. She carried 1 bag. Around her neck there was a small pendant on a cord, a piece of bone carved roughly into the shape of something that might have been an animal or might have been a tool. It was hard to tell. She looked around the briefing room the same way Aaron had, but where Aaron had looked calm, Lily looked something else. She looked like she was noting exits. Valethor introduced the unit. The aliens introduced themselves in turn. Dren crossed 2 of his thick arms and looked at Lily for a long time before he said his name. He was the largest soldier in the room. He stood nearly 2.5 meters tall. His skin was the color of old stone, and his muscles sat on his bones the way boulders sit on a hillside, like they had always been there and were not planning to move. Lily looked back at him without changing her expression at all. After the introductions, there was a short period where the humans stood together near the wall and talked quietly about nothing important. Food, mostly. The quality of the food on the Sovereign Reach versus the food at their last posting. Lily said the reconstituted protein here smelled better than the stuff they'd had in the Kepler zone. Derek said that was not a high bar. And Aaron said he had stopped thinking about food as something that should taste like anything, and now just thought of it as fuel. And Derek told him that was the saddest thing he had ever heard. Dren watched this from across the room. He leaned toward Sarath and said quietly in Murak that the small human female did not look like she belonged on a combat vessel. Sarath, who had studied more about humans than any other member of the unit, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, also quietly, that this was almost certainly not true, and that Dren might want to hold that opinion loosely. Dren made a sound that meant he disagreed, but was willing to wait. Vilethor called the room to attention and gave the standard briefing for new unit integration. He talked about the Kreth Dominion activity near the Outer Veil. He talked about patrol rotations and alert levels and the importance of unit cohesion in close-quarters shipboard combat. He talked about expectations, and he was clear and thorough and said everything a commanding officer was supposed to say. And at the end, as he always did before the start of a new training cycle, he gave the standing order. It was something he had said many times before. He believed in it. It was a principle, a way of thinking about preparation. No mercy during sparring, he said. You train the way you fight. He looked at each soldier as he said it. He meant it as a push. So a reminder that training was not a performance and not a polite exchange. He had said these same words to 4 different units over 6 years, and every soldier who had ever heard them had understood them the same way. As motivation, as a mindset, as a direction to take training seriously and not hold back out of comfort or courtesy. Lily Kane, standing near the back of the room, took the small notepad from her jacket pocket. She wrote the order down. She looked at it. She underlined it once, and then she underlined it again. Then she put the notepad away and looked up at the front of the room with those calm, steady, exit-noting eyes. Vilethor dismissed the unit. Derek leaned toward Lily as they filed out and said something under his breath. She shook her head slightly. Aaron, walking just behind them, heard enough to catch the shape of the conversation. He looked at the ceiling briefly, like a man doing a calculation he already knew the answer to. None of the 3 humans said anything else about it. In the corridor, Dren told Keth that tomorrow's sparring session would be a good chance to understand where the new human fit in the unit. He said it would be quick and simple. He said the small ones usually figured out the order of things fast. Keth, who had served with humans before, said nothing. He just walked a little faster. The commander said, "No mercy during sparring." The Death World girl took the order literally. So Part 2. The Sparring Hall and the First Mistake. The sparring hall on the lower deck of the Sovereign Reach was a wide, low-ceilinged room with padded floor plating and walls that had been reinforced twice over the years because of incidents that the maintenance log described only as impact damage, cause, training activity. There was a medical monitoring station in one corner. There were 2 benches along the far wall. Overhead, a row of white lights ran the length of the ceiling and made everything look very clean and very honest. It was the kind of room where there was nowhere to hide from what you were. The unit filed in at the start of the morning cycle. Vilethor stood near the monitoring station with a data pad. He watched his soldiers warm up. The Murak did not warm up so much as they simply stood and became more alert. The Solvari stretched in long, precise movements. Sarath moved through a careful sequence that looked like a dance, and almost certainly was not. Derek and Aaron stretched on the near side of the room and talked in low voices. Lily stood apart from them. She was not stretching. She was standing still with her arms loose at her sides and her eyes moving slowly around the room. She looked at the walls. She looked at the floor. She looked at Dren, who stood in the center of the hall like a piece of furniture that had decided to develop opinions about combat. And Dren looked back at her. Vilethor called the first match. He paired Lily with Dren deliberately. Not cruelly, he was not a cruel officer, but practically. Dren was large and experienced and reliable. He would make a strong first impression of the unit's standards. He would be physical enough to test the new soldier properly and controlled enough not to actually hurt her. It was a clean, sensible pairing, the kind that put a new recruit in their place quickly and without drama. Then he called the match to begin. Dren settled into his stance. His feet were wide, his lower arms were up, and his upper arms were held back, a Murak fighting position that presented a wall of body and said, very clearly, that the smart move was to wait and probe and find a way around. He had used this stance 100 times. He had beaten soldiers twice his own experience level from behind it. He waited for Lily to make a careful first move. She crossed the distance between them in less than a second. Not a jog, not a cautious approach. She moved like she had been holding something back and had simply stopped doing that. Her first move was low, much lower than Dren expected for a soldier her size, and she dropped her whole body beneath his reach, both hands finding the joint of his right knee with something that was not quite a strike and not quite a grab, but was absolutely both. She twisted. Her whole body torqued into the motion, using her own weight and his own mass against him in a single, unbroken action. 340 pounds of Murak soldier went sideways. He hit the floor hard enough that the impact padding compressed fully and the sensors in the wall blinked. The room went quiet. Dren did not stay down. He was too experienced for that. He rolled and came up fast, faster than his size suggested he could, and the match became something else. Something that was not a training session anymore. It became a real thing. Dren was no longer managing a new recruit. He was working. He was paying full attention. He was pushing everything he had into the match because nothing less was making a difference. Lily moved around him in short, efficient bursts. She did not waste motion. When he swung, she was already somewhere else. Not when she came in, she used her smaller size the way a crack uses a wall, finding the place where the structure was weakest and putting all her force into exactly that point. She did not look fast. She looked like she was always in the right place just slightly before he was. He hit her twice. The second hit was hard. It would have sat most soldiers down. She stepped with it, absorbed it, and came back from a different angle. She was breathing harder. And her ribs, though nobody knew it yet, had cracked from the force of that second blow. She did not slow down. The other soldiers had stopped moving. Keth stood with one hand raised mid-stretch, frozen in place. Orvan had taken 2 steps toward the hall without meaning to. Aaron had his arms crossed and was looking at the floor. Derek was watching with the expression of someone who had known this was coming and had not found a way to stop it. Futsarath was watching Lily with his head slightly tilted, and if a Drenathi could look reverent, he looked something close to it. Vielthor called the halt. Both soldiers stopped. Dren stepped back. He was breathing hard through his wide nasal slits. His right forearm was held at a slightly wrong angle. Lily stepped back too, 2 steps, and then stood still with her arms loose at her sides again. Same position as before the match. Yet like she had just finished a task and was ready for the next one. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Vielthor said, in a flat voice, that Dren should go to the medical station. Dren went. His forearm had a hairline fracture. He sat on the medical bench and let the scanner run over it, and did not say a single word, which for a Murak was remarkable. Lily sat on the far bench and drank from her water container. Derek walked over and sat beside her. He did not say anything at first. Then he asked quietly if she was all right. She said yes. He gave her a look. She said she was fine. He said okay, in the tone of a man who did not believe her, but was choosing to accept the answer. Aaron was still standing in the center of the room. Vielthor had not moved from the monitoring station. The two of them looked at each other across the hall for a moment, the commander and the experienced human sergeant, and something passed between them that was not a conversation, but held as much information as one. Vielthor looked back down at his datapad. The rest of the morning's matches went ahead. They were quieter than usual. The soldiers moved with more care than normal, not because they were less serious, but because something had changed in the room. Everyone had seen something they were still processing. Even the Murak soldiers, who did not process things slowly as a rule, were moving through their sparring with a different kind of attention. The kind that comes from watching something you thought you understood and realizing the map in your head was drawn wrong. By the end of the session, Vielthor had reviewed the sensor record of Lily's match twice on his datapad. He would review it a third time before he called her into his office. He would review it a fourth time after she left. He had commanded 3 human soldiers before. He had thought he understood them well enough. He was starting to understand that well enough was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and that it was not enough at all. The commander said, "No mercy during sparring. The Death World girl took the order, literally." Part 3. The fallout and the question. No one wanted to ask. Vielthor's office was small and tidy. He kept it that way on purpose. A clean space helped him think clearly, and right now he needed to think very clearly. He sat behind his desk and looked at the chair across from him, where Lily Kane was sitting with her hands resting loosely on her knees, her back straight, her expression the same calm, even thing it had been since the moment she walked onto his ship. She had 2 cracked ribs. The medical scan had caught it when he ordered a post-sparring check on everyone in the unit. She had not reported it. But she had not asked for anything for the pain. She had finished the rest of the session's drills, drunk her water, and waited to be called. He looked at her for a moment before he started talking. Then he asked her, in a careful and measured voice, why she had escalated the match beyond the unit's standard sparring parameters. Lily looked at him steadily and said she had followed his order. Vielthor repeated the order back to her. "No mercy during sparring. You train the way you fight." Oh, she nodded and said that was correct. He explained patiently what he had meant by it. He said it was a philosophy, a mindset, a way of reminding soldiers to take training seriously instead of going through the motions. He said it was something he had told every unit he had ever commanded, and that every soldier had understood it the same way, as encouragement, not as a literal operational directive. Lily listened to all of this. She did not interrupt. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked him a question. She asked, "Commander, on Earth, if you train at 70%, you die at 100%. So what exactly was the order?" Vielthor opened his mouth and then closed it again. He sat with that question for a long time. It was not a rude question. It was not a challenging question in the way that some soldiers pushed back against authority to make a point. It was a genuine, simple, honest question. And the problem was that he did not have a good answer to it. He had always believed his order meant something real. He had believed it was serious advice. And now, a 22-year-old human from a Class 7 hazard world was sitting across from him with 2 cracked ribs and a calm face and asking him, very reasonably, if he had actually meant it or not. He dismissed her from the office and sat alone for a while. Across the ship, the rest of the unit was dealing with what they had seen in the sparring hall. The Murak soldiers, all 3 of them, including Dren, who had returned from medical with a wrapped forearm and a very thoughtful expression, were gathered in the crew common room. They were not talking loudly, which was unusual. Murak talked loudly as a baseline. When they were quiet, it meant they were thinking hard about something they had not expected to have to think about. Dren sat with his injured arm resting on the table. He was replaying the match in his head, not because it bothered him to have lost. Murak did not feel shame about being beaten by a skilled opponent. He was replaying it because he genuinely could not identify the moment where he had lost control of the fight. He knew it had happened. He could feel in his body all the places where Lily's movements had landed. But when he tried to find the exact moment where things had shifted, and it kept sliding away from him. The match had not gone wrong at one point. It had gone wrong at every point, continuously, from the very first second, because she had started at a level he had not prepared for and had never come down from it. He sent a short message to the unit channel. It said he wanted a rematch, not at 70%. Aaron Briggs, sitting in his bunk reading it, put his face in his hands. Derek, lying on his bunk above him. I said that he had tried to warn him and that he was not going to pretend otherwise. Aaron said that warning was not the word he would use for what Derek had done, and Derek said that was fair. Sarath, meanwhile, was in the small research alcove near the back of the ship where he spent most of his free time. He was pulling records. And the Dranathi had a scholar-warrior tradition that went back thousands of years. They believed a soldier who did not study was only half a soldier, and Sarath was very much a product of that tradition. He had read the standard coalition file on humans when he first joined the unit. He had thought he understood it reasonably well. He was now reading it again, more slowly, and finding things he had missed before. He read the section on Earth's environment, and gravity higher than the coalition standard, atmospheric oxygen at levels that taxed most other species, temperature ranges across the planet's surface that should have made large-scale civilization impossible, a history of megafauna predators that had been hunting humans for most of their evolutionary development, a history of intra-species conflict, humans fighting other humans, stretching back so far into the past that the records became archaeology, became geology. And then he read the section on human military training doctrine. He read about boot camps. He read about the deliberate use of physical and mental stress as training tools. He read about sleep deprivation and extreme physical loads and psychological pressure, all applied to young humans at the beginning of their military careers, on purpose, by the people responsible for preparing them for combat. He read a line in a historical overview of Earth's military history that said, in plain language, that fatalities during training had occurred and had been considered, at various points in history, an acceptable cost of producing effective soldiers. He sat with that for a long time. Then he went and found Aaron in the corridor outside the crew quarters and asked him quietly and directly whether that line was accurate. Aaron looked at him for a moment. Then he said yes, it was accurate, and that it was not something most humans were proud of, but that it was real, and that it had shaped the way humans thought about training in ways that were hard to explain to people who had not grown up inside it. Sarath asked how a species developed an attitude like that. Aaron said, by losing a lot of people to things they weren't ready for and deciding they were never going to let that happen again. Sarath thought about that for the rest of the evening. Velthor, in his office, pulled up the coalition file on human soldiers one more time. He read the section on pain tolerance. He read the subsection on documented cases of humans continuing combat activity while carrying injuries that were classified as incapacitating in 8 other species. He thought about Lily's 2 cracked ribs and her steady eyes and her water container and the fact that she had not said a single word. He closed the file and stared at the wall. He had commanded 3 human soldiers before. He had thought that was enough to understand what he was working with. He understood now that what he had actually understood was the surface of the thing, the polite version, the version humans presented when they were in a new place and did not want to make anyone uncomfortable. He had given an order, and one of them had simply taken it at full value. No translation, no softening, just the order as stated, applied as completely as her body and training would allow. Then he started writing a note to himself about the training protocol. He was not sure yet what he was going to change, but he was very sure that something needed to change and that it was not going to involve making the training easier. The commander said, "No mercy during sparring." The Death World girl took the order, literally. Part 4. No Mercy, Properly Understood. Velthor called the full unit assembly the following morning. He did it early, before the day cycle had fully started. Yeah, when the ship was still in the half-light of its night setting and the corridors were quiet and the whole vessel felt like a held breath. He sent the message to every unit member at the same time. No explanation, just the time and the location. They gathered in the main briefing room. 14 soldiers of 7 different species, still adjusting to the day, standing or sitting in the loose formation of a group that had been called together without warning and did not yet know why. And Dren had his wrapped arm close to his side. Sarath had brought his notepad. Derek and Aaron had the alert, slightly cautious look of soldiers who had learned that unexpected early assemblies were rarely about good news. Lily stood near the back. She was the only one who looked fully awake and fully ready. She always looked that way. Vilethor stood at the front of the room and looked at his unit. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that most of the soldiers in the room had never heard a coalition officer of his rank say. He said he had been imprecise with his language, and he wanted to fix that. The room shifted slightly, not physically, just the quality of the attention changed. He said that when he gave the order about no mercy during sparring, he had believed every soldier in the room understood what he meant. And he said he had used those words for 6 years, and every unit had always understood them the same way. He said it had not occurred to him until yesterday that the phrase might mean something genuinely different to someone from a different world with a different history. And he said that he was not calling the assembly to reprimand anyone. He was calling it because he wanted to understand the gap, and he needed his unit to help him do that. He looked at Derek and Aaron. He asked them to explain. Derek looked at Aaron. Aaron looked at the ceiling briefly. Then he stood up and started talking. He started with Earth. He did not start with military history or training doctrine. He started with the planet itself, because he had found over the years that it was the only place to start if you actually wanted other species to understand anything about humans. He talked about the gravity first, higher than the coalition standard. Enough that humans who went off-world often felt physically lighter for weeks and had to recalibrate their sense of their own strength. He talked about the weather, not the average weather, but the range of it. The storms that could strip the surface of small islands in hours. The winters that could freeze an unprotected person to death in a matter of minutes. The summers in certain regions that were genuinely lethal to unprotected exposure. Then he talked about the animals. He talked about this for a while. What Earth's predators looked like. What they were capable of. How humans had coexisted with them for hundreds of thousands of years before developing the tools and numbers to change the dynamic, and how that long history of being hunted had written itself into human biology and human instinct in ways that could not simply be switched off. He said that humans did not come from a world that let them relax. That they came from a world that punished relaxation consistently and without mercy, and the ones who survived were the ones whose bodies and minds learned to stay ready. The room was quiet. Dren was listening with his full attention. Keth had stopped leaning against the wall and was sitting forward in his seat. Then Aaron talked about training. He was straightforward about it. He said that human military conditioning was built on a simple idea. The gap between training intensity and real combat intensity gets people killed, so you close the gap as much as possible. You train until it is not training anymore. You train until your body does not know the difference between a controlled environment and an uncontrolled one, because in the moment when it matters, you will not have time to think about which one you are in. He said that when Lily heard the commander's order, she did not hear motivation. She heard information. She heard a statement about how this unit trained. And she had responded to that information the way a United Earth Marine Corps soldier responds to direct instruction, completely and without reservation. Lily had not moved from her spot near the back of the room. She had her arms resting loosely at her sides, and she was looking at the floor in a way that was not ashamed, just quiet. I'd like she was letting the conversation happen around her and did not feel the need to add to it. Velthor asked her the question directly. He asked if she had felt she was in danger during the match with Dren. She looked up. She thought about it. She took the question seriously in the way she seemed to take most things, without performing the thinking, just actually doing it. Then she said, "No, but I fight like I am, because the one time I don't, I might actually be." The room sat with that. Sarath was the first one to speak after her. He said quietly that in Drenathi culture there was a concept. There was no clean translation for it in Coalition Standard, but the closest thing was something like the warrior who carries the memory of every fight they almost lost. He said it described a kind of readiness that was not reactive, but permanent. A state of having already accepted the worst possibility so that it could no longer catch you off guard. He said that in Drenathi tradition, it was considered the highest form of martial discipline, and that most soldiers spent their whole careers chasing it and never fully reaching it. He said he had always thought of it as something you built deliberately, over many years, through study and practice and meditation. He said he was reconsidering that now. Dren asked Derek a question then. He asked whether all human soldiers fought the way Lily fought. Derek was honest. He said no, not exactly. Every human soldier was different, same as any species. But he said that the baseline, the floor that every human soldier started from before they added any training on top of it, was a body and a mind shaped by 40,000 years of surviving a world that did not grade on a curve. The training made it sharper. The instinct came with the species. Vaelthor listened to all of it. When the room was quiet again, he made a decision. He did not lower the training intensity. He raised the standard for the whole unit. He extended the sparring sessions. He changed the parameters so that matches were conducted at a level that was closer to what Lily had always operated at. And he put the unit on notice that the next 3 weeks were going to be different from anything they had trained through before. Dren said he had no objection to this. Sarath wrote 3 full pages of notes. Aaron said something quiet to Derek that sounded like resignation, but looked, around the eyes, like respect. After the assembly, as the unit filed out and the day cycle came fully on and the ship settled back into its normal sounds, Vaelthor sat at his desk and wrote a note in the unit's official training record. He did not know yet that the note would eventually make it into Coalition officer training programs. And he was just writing down what he had understood. He wrote that the human concept of training was not a philosophy, it was a survival mechanism. It had been built over tens of thousands of years by a species on a world that did not offer second chances, and it could not be fully understood by looking at it from the outside. You had to understand where it came from, and once you understood where it came from, and the phrase "no mercy during sparring" stopped being motivation and started being something much simpler and much more serious. It was just the truth, stated plainly, by someone who had always meant it. The commander said, "No mercy during sparring." The Death World girl took the order. Literally. Part 5. The Kreth engagement and what the Death World girl means. 3 weeks passed. They were not easy weeks. Vaelthor had meant what he said about the training. And the unit learned quickly that he had not been exaggerating. The sparring sessions were longer and harder. The physical drills ran deeper into the rest cycle. The scenarios ran with less warning and less structure, which was the point. Real situations did not give warning or structure, and the unit needed to stop expecting them to. The non-human soldiers pushed through it with varying degrees of grace. The Murak adapted fastest, and they were built for hard physical work and found the raised intensity satisfying in a way that required no explanation. The Solvari took longer. They were precise soldiers who preferred known conditions and had to work to adjust to the new unpredictability. Sarath found the conceptual shift harder than the physical one. He understood in his mind what the training was trying to build, but understanding a thing and having it in your body were not the same. And he spent a lot of the 3 weeks bridging that gap. Lily, Derek, and Aaron trained the same way they had always trained. Nothing had changed for them. They had always been at this level. The only difference was that now the unit around them was trying to get there too. By the end of the second week, something had shifted. The unit moved differently. Not perfectly. 3 weeks was not enough to rebuild everything. But the matches in the sparring hall felt different. Oh, there was less holding back. There was more actual attention. Dren and Lily had sparred 6 more times, and each time it was longer and harder and more real, and the results were different each time, and Dren had sent Lily a formal Murak acknowledgement of skill after the 4th match, which was the equivalent of a significant compliment, and which Lily had accepted with a nod and a short thank you. Sarath had also asked her to walk him through her footwork after one session. She had done it for 20 minutes without any sign of impatience, and Sarath had spent the next 2 days practicing the same 3 movements over and over until they stopped feeling foreign. The unit was becoming something tighter. Not a performance of cohesion, but the real thing. The kind built from shared difficulty and honest effort. On the 22nd day, the Sovereign Reach picked up a Kreth Dominion formation, moving toward the Outer Veil perimeter. It looked like a patrol group at first. 5 ships in a loose formation, the kind of thing that happened regularly in contested space and usually resolved into a mutual withdrawal after the 2 sides confirmed each other's presence and decided the math did not favor an engagement. It did not resolve that way. One of the Kreth ships broke from the formation and moved fast toward the Reach. The other 4 spread into a blocking pattern. It was not a patrol. And it was an ambush that had been waiting for the right position, and the Sovereign Reach had moved into it. The Kreth vessel hit the port docking collar at full approach speed and locked on. 4 cutting torches started on the hull simultaneously in 4 different locations, each one a different corridor junction. This was the part of the plan that was designed to be overwhelming. 4 entry points at once, so that the defenders had to split their response. And in the seconds it took to do that, the breach teams could push through and start establishing positions inside the ship. The plan was built on one assumption, that the coalition crew would need several minutes to organize a coherent response while processing the shock of a sudden multi-point breach. Lily Kane was already moving before the second alarm sounded. She had been in the lower corridor near the equipment lockers when the first impact hit, and she felt it through the floor before the alarm registered in her ears. She did not wait for the announcement. She did not wait for formation orders or a squad signal or confirmation of what was happening. She moved toward the impact because that was the direction the problem was in, and problems in confined spaces did not get better by giving them time to settle. Derek was 10 seconds behind her. He had been in the crew quarters and came through the connecting corridor at a run, his equipment in hand, already knowing from the way the ship had shuddered exactly what kind of contact they were dealing with. Aaron came from the other direction, from the main passage, because he had been closer to the alert station and had read the situation from the sensor display before moving, which gave him a slightly different angle and exactly the additional 2 seconds of information that made his approach matter. And the Kreth breach team came through the port junction in a tight formation. 6 soldiers, heavy armored, moving with the speed and confidence of a unit that had done this before and expected the first 20 seconds to be easy. Their visors showed them an empty corridor. For 1 second, it was empty. Then Lily was in front of them. She did not wait for them to fully orient. She hit the lead soldier before his footing was stable from the breach crossing. He used his own forward momentum and the narrow corridor geometry to turn his mass against the one behind him, and was already moving past the resulting collision before either of them had processed what happened. She did not fight them the way she had fought Dren, open space, circling, finding angles. She fought them the way her body knew to fight in a tight metal corridor on a ship where every wall was a tool and every second of disorder on the enemy's side was a second she could use. Derek came in from the side junction. Aaron came in from behind. The corridor was loud and close and fast. 30 seconds after the breach team entered the corridor, they were no longer moving forward. 50 seconds after that, the rest of the unit arrived. Vielthor had organized the response from the command deck with exactly the kind of calm precision that made him a good commander. He had the corridors covered, the backup positions set, and the secondary breach points locked down. When his soldiers arrived at the port junction, they found the situation already contained, holding at the line Lily and Derek and Aaron had set, and the Kreth breach team no longer pressing forward. The Kreth formation held its position for 4 more minutes. Then it released the docking lock and withdrew. The 4 ships in the blocking formation pulled back with it. The engagement was over. 11 minutes, start to finish. The Sovereign Reach had no fatalities. And 3 soldiers were injured, 2 Solvari with minor lacerations from breach debris, and Derek with a wrenched shoulder that he did not report until Aaron physically pointed at it and stared at him until he admitted it existed. Vielthor walked the corridor after the all clear. He looked at the breach point. He looked at the position marks on the floor where the fighting had happened. And he stood there for a while in the quiet of a corridor that had been loud and dangerous 12 minutes ago, and was now just a corridor again. Then he went to his office and wrote the after-action report. He documented everything with the clean precision that coalition reporting required. Every position, every movement, every decision, every figure. He wrote it thoroughly and carefully. At the end, in the section reserved for commanding officer observations, he wrote a note. And he wrote that when he had given the order at the start of the training cycle, he had intended it as motivational phrasing. He wrote that Private Kane had taken it as a literal operational directive, and that in retrospect she had been correct to do so, and he had been imprecise. He wrote that the human understanding of training was not a philosophy. It was a survival mechanism, built over 40,000 years on a world that had not cared whether they lived or died. And it could not be separated from the soldiers it had produced. He wrote that coalition forces would benefit from studying this not as a curiosity, but as a doctrine. He wrote that these soldiers did not have an internal setting for easing up in training because they had never been given the conditions in which that setting could safely develop, and that this was not a flaw. And then he wrote that in 11 minutes against a Kreth breach team designed to overwhelm a standard coalition response, that particular quality had been the margin between the ship's survival and its loss. He marked the report complete and sent it up the chain. In the corridor outside the crew quarters, Lily was sitting on a crate with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out in front of her. She had a copy of the report on her handheld screen. Derek had forwarded it to her without asking anyone's permission, as was his habit. She read it to the end. She read Vielthor's observation twice. Then she folded the screen dark, tucked it into her jacket pocket next to the bone pendant, and sat quietly for a little while with the sounds of the ship around her. After a while, she stood up, straightened her jacket, and went to find Dren. They had a sparring session scheduled. She did not ease up. She never did.